Oh, good evening. Come in, and quickly, mind, because for once I'm not the only one waiting on you. Can you hear that? Down past the reading chairs, through the far door. That low, happy murmur, like a hive that's learned good manners. That's the Wellspring tonight, the river wing. We've rather a lot of company this evening. Travellers, wanderers, a few faces I know very well, and a few I've only just written into the log. Somebody started a story down on the bank a few hours ago, and somebody else added one, and, well, you know how it goes down there. Or you're about to. It's turned into a proper story-swapping night. Everyone takes a turn. There's tea going along the bank, and somebody's brought honey cakes, which I did not bake and cannot take credit for, and the fireflies have come in off the meadow to hang about over the water as though they've paid for seats. And here is the thing, my dear insomniac. It's my turn next. So no, you haven't come at a bad time. You've come at precisely the right one. Come down with me, mind the step where the stone dips, just there, and find a spot on the grass, or on the bank, or dip your feet in the shallows if you like. The river doesn't mind. It never has. Now, the story I've picked for tonight isn't one of mine, and it isn't from the shelves. It was told to me right here, on this very bank, by a company of adventurers who came through not so long ago, 5 of them, loud and sunburnt and absolutely delighted with themselves. And I want to be honest with you. I have been waiting for an excuse to tell it ever since. It is not a gentle story. It is not a wise story. I'm not sure it has a single lesson in it anywhere, and I've looked. It is simply the funniest thing anyone has told me in a very long while, and it has the great advantage of being, so they swore to me, hands on hearts, entirely true. They called it The Keeper's Had Enough. Settle in, you'll see why. Far off from here, where the land runs out and the sea takes over, there was a port town called Brindlemore, and if you have never heard of it, you are one of the few, because everyone passed through Brindlemore sooner or later. It was that kind of town. The harbour never emptied, and the streets never quite went quiet. Merchants came through with spices that made the whole dock smell like somewhere warmer. Traders came with carts, adventurers came with maps, pilgrims came with questions, and pirates, yes, actual pirates, flags and all, came with the sort of grins that made shopkeepers count their spoons. And here was the remarkable thing about Brindlemore. None of them made trouble, or rather, trouble was made, now and then, because people are people. But it never lasted, because the whole town had an understanding, old as the harbour stones. Everyone loved the place too much to let anyone spoil it. If a fight broke out on the dock, it would be broken up inside a minute by whoever happened to be nearest. A fishwife, a customs clerk, a pirate captain, a nun. Didn't matter. In Brindlemore, keeping the peace was everybody's job, and everybody did it, and then everybody went back to their drinks. The town had everything a town could want. A blacksmith, whose hammer you could set your watch by, bakers who were up before the gulls, fishermen, net makers, map makers, a woman who sold knots, just knots, tied beautifully, and did rather well out of it. And taverns. Oh, Brindlemore had taverns the way a dog has fleas. Everywhere. Thriving. Impossible to fully count. But there was one tavern known above all the others, the Gilded Gull, down near the harbour steps. And it was not famous for its food, though the food was good. It was not famous for its ale, though the ale was better. It was famous because of Tessa. And here, I'll just say, the moment the adventurers said her name, all 5 of them went quiet for a second, the way you do out of respect. I should have known then what I was in for. Tessa had grown up in the Gilded Gull, the way other children grow up in houses. Her family kept the place, and from the time she was small enough to need a crate to see over the bar, she'd been in it, carrying mugs 2 at a time, with her tongue poking out in concentration, wiping tables she could barely reach across, sitting on the counter of an evening while sailors from 6 kingdoms taught her sea songs her mother then had to unteach her. By the time she was grown, there was nothing about tavern keeping Tessa didn't know, and very little about people she hadn't seen. She could tell a merchant's mood by how he hung his coat. She knew which sailors were homesick and slipped them the bigger portions without a word about it. She remembered names and orders and birthdays and grudges, the grudges especially, so she could seat people accordingly. And she was lovely. Everyone said so. Warm brown eyes, a smile that made strangers feel like regulars, a laugh you could hear from the street that made passers-by decide quite suddenly that they were thirsty. But Brindlemoor's locals knew something that newcomers had to learn for themselves, usually the hard way. Tessa's sweetness had a bottom to it, and beneath that bottom was bedrock. Let a customer get rude with the serving girl, and Tessa would appear at his elbow with a voice gone suddenly flat and pleasant in the most alarming way, and the man would find himself apologizing before he entirely understood why. Let a fight break out, and Tessa would wade into it, not around it, and haul 2 grown men apart by their collars like a woman separating quarrelling cats. And on the rare, storied occasions when things went truly sideways, well, there was the time a pickpocket lifted a purse off a sleeping fisherman, and Tessa chased him out the door, down the harbour steps, along the full length of the dock, through the fish market, around the chandlers, and back up the high street, broom in hand the entire way, until the poor fool ran directly into the arms of the town watch just to be safe from her. The watch, it said, thanked her and asked her to please stop doing their job better than they did. There was the time she threw a man out of the Gull, not showed him out, threw him through the doorway in a gentle arc for insulting her cook's chowder. The man came back the next evening, sober and sheepish, apologized to the cook, and became a regular for the next 11 years. The locals adored her for all of it. To Brindlemoor, Tessa wasn't just a tavern keeper. She was a fixed point, a law of nature with an apron. You could no more imagine the town without her than without the tide. Which brings us to the night in question. The adventurers were there for this, you understand. All 5 of them. Eyewitnesses. They kept interrupting each other to correct the details, which is how you know a story is true. It began, as these things do, innocently. A ship came into harbour at dusk, a big weathered thing, rigging patched in 9 colours, home from what had clearly been a very long voyage indeed. Her crew came ashore, the way sailors do after months at sea, slightly sideways, blinking at solid ground, and hungry enough to eat the concept of food itself. Perhaps 40 of them. And they went, of course, where everyone goes. They filled the Gilded Gull to its beams. And for the first few hours it was wonderful. Tessa liked sailors. They tipped well. They sang in tune more often than adventurers did. And they ate like her cook's talents were finally being properly appreciated. The crew told tales of where they'd been, and stood rounds for the locals, and the whole tavern glowed with that particular golden warmth of a good night getting better. The trouble was, it kept getting better. And then it got better past the point where better should stop. It's hard to say exactly when the evening tipped. The adventurers argued about this at length on the riverbank. One said it was when the third barrel was tapped. One said it was when the arm wrestling started. The one with the beard insisted the true beginning was when somebody bet a knight, an actual knight, who'd wandered in off the coast road in full armour, that he couldn't drink from his own helmet without spilling. He could not, for the record, drink from his own helmet without spilling. But wherever it began, by midnight, the gilded gull had descended into what the adventurers described with genuine awe as the most magnificent catastrophe any of them had ever personally survived. Understand, Tessa had seen Rowdy. Tessa had raised Rowdy from a pup. But this was something else. This was Rowdy with reinforcements. The mugs went airborne first. Not thrown in anger, you understand. Thrown in celebration, which is somehow worse, because angry people eventually tire, but happy people encore. Mead rained down like a blessing nobody had asked for. The floor, which Tessa had scrubbed that very dawn, on her knees until it shone, vanished under a lake of ale you could have sailed a toy boat across. A dwarf, for reasons that died with the evening, declared war on a chair. Not a person. A chair. He had it in a headlock near the hearth, and the chair, by all accounts, was giving as good as it got. And the truly remarkable thing, the detail the adventurers kept returning to, was that nobody cared. Grown men stepped over the wrestling dwarf to reach the bar, as though he were furniture himself. The ship's bard, who had been standing on a table conducting the room in a shanty, sat down very suddenly, midway through the second verse, directly into a bowl of stew, and went to sleep in it. Face first, gently steaming. The knight, helmet already disgraced, somehow lost his boots. Both of them, while wearing them. To this day, nobody knows how, and the knight, least of all. He was found wandering the tavern in steel from the ankles up and stockings from the ankles down, asking everyone he met if they'd seen a pair of sabatons walking about on their own. I want you to hold that picture a moment. A full-grown knight, padding about in his socks, asking politely. The adventurers had to stop and collect themselves at this point in the telling, and frankly, so did I. There was a wizard among the crew. Every crew has one, it seems, who chose this moment to demonstrate a cantrip and turn the tavern cat a vivid, luminous blue. The cat, whose name was Admiral, was not consulted, and when Tessa rounded on the wizard, the man looked her dead in the eye, pointed at his own sea chest, and blamed the loot. Cursed treasure, he said. Very sad. Nothing to be done. The cat, meanwhile, sat glowing on the bar like a small, furious lighthouse. A ranger, and this detail, I'm assured, is completely true, had made friends earlier that day with a wild boar, as rangers will, and the boar had followed him to town, as boars will, and the ranger, several drinks past wisdom, decided his new friend deserved to see the inside of a tavern. The boar came through the front door at speed, extremely muddy, extremely delighted, and proceeded to charge the length of the common room like a furry cannonball with opinions. Half the guests went out the windows. The other half cheered. A goblin, nobody's crew, just a local, ordinarily very well behaved, took advantage of the chaos to begin quietly collecting candles. All of them, off every table, into a sack, one by one, with the serene face of someone doing honest work. The tavern grew gradually, mysteriously darker, and it took a full quarter-hour for anyone to work out why. A pirate picked a fight with someone who turned out to be another pirate, which by pirate law meant everyone standing nearby had to at least consider joining in. And the baker, Brindlemore's own baker, a mild, flowery man of 60 who had come in for one quiet nightcap, was up on the long table, dancing. Not well, not briefly, with commitment. Witnesses say he showed no signs of stopping, ever, and had the look of a man making up for 40 years of early bedtimes in a single evening. And through all of it, through the flying mugs and the wrestling dwarf and the blue cat and the boar, stood Tessa, behind her bar, very still. The locals noticed the stillness first. The locals knew what the stillness meant. One or two of them, the adventurers said, began quietly gathering their coats. Tessa looked at her floor, scrubbed since break of dawn, now a shallow sea. She looked at her tables, one cracked clean, down the middle, one hosting a dancing baker, one wearing a sleeping bard as a centerpiece. She looked at her candles, disappearing into a sack. She looked at Admiral, glowing. And something in Tessa, some final, load-bearing timber of patience that had held up 20-odd years of tavern-keeping, quietly, audibly, gave way. She reached beneath the bar. She took up the broom. The broom. And out of that sweet-faced, warm-eyed young woman came a voice that had no earthly business fitting inside her. A voice like a harbour bell, like a sergeant of the guard, like thunder that had been raised by a strict grandmother, and the first word of it stopped the fiddle mid-note, froze the dwarf mid-grapple, and woke the bard out of his stew. Out! And here I must be honest with you. The adventurer who performed this bit stood up to do it on the riverbank. Boots planted, broom mimed, the whole performance. The heron that lives down past the far shelves took off in fright and didn't come back for an hour. I nearly went with it. What followed? The crew would later describe the way soldiers describe weather at sea. In hushed tones, with respect, and with a certain gratitude at having lived. Tessa came around that bar like the tide coming in, and she went through that tavern end to end, and nothing escaped her. She parted the two pirates mid-brawl with one sweep of the broom handle and sent them to opposite corners like schoolboys, and to opposite corners they went, muttering, "Yes, ma'am," in stereo. She plucked the sack of candles from the goblin's hands, extracted an apology, and, because she was still, underneath it all, Tessa, let him keep one candle for the walk home. She hauled the bard out of the stew by his collar, looked into his stew-covered face, pronounced the single word bed, and pointed, and he went, weeping quietly, thanking her. She confronted the boar, who had bowled over half the port's toughest sailors without slowing, took one look at Tessa mid-stride, broom aloft, apron flying, and made a decision that no one present ever faulted it for. It left. Through the same window, it had been eyeing anyway, at speed, with the ranger chasing after it, shouting apologies to the room in general. She informed the wizard, at a range of about 4 inches, that Admiral would be restored to his correct and lawful colour before the wizard slept that night, or the wizard would not sleep that night, and possibly not any night. And the wizard discovered, miraculously, that the curse on his lute could in fact be lifted right away. Actually, no trouble at all. So sorry for the confusion. She got the knight's boots back. Don't ask me how. Nobody knows how. The adventurers didn't know how. The boots were simply on his feet again by the end of the night, and the knight was sitting up straight with his hands in his lap like a boy at temple. And the baker, the dancing baker, she didn't even have to touch. She simply looked at him. He climbed down off the table by himself, straightened his flour-dusted coat with tremendous dignity, said, "Evening, Tessa," and walked out the front door as though the whole thing had been someone else entirely. Sailors twice her size stacked chairs because she pointed at chairs. Hardened seamen who had faced krakens, and worse, formed an orderly queue to settle their tabs. "Leave your gold and get outside," she told them, in exactly that order. And they left their gold, and they got outside. And several of them thanked her on the way out, and none of them could have told you why. By the last bell of the night, the Gilded Gull stood empty and mopped and quiet. Tessa set the broom back in its corner, patted it once, the way you'd pat a good dog, poured herself the last clean cup of tea in the building, and sat down in the wreckage of her evening with her feet up on the one uncracked table. An admiral, restored to his proper grey, climbed into her lap, and the two of them watched the harbour lights out the window until the tea was gone. Now, here is my favourite part. You might think 40 sailors thrown into the street mid-revel would hold a grudge. They did not. They woke the next day in various haylofts and doorways around Brindlemoor, pieced the night together over breakfast, and came to a unanimous conclusion. That woman was the single most magnificent thing any of them had ever seen, on land or sea. And because they were sailors, and sailors cannot leave a strong feeling alone without setting it to music, by the time their ship left harbour 2 days later, they had written a song about it. It's called "The Keepers Had Enough," same as the story, and I'm told it has travelled further than the ship that wrote it, that it's sung now in taverns half a world from Brindlemoor, by people who have no idea Tessa is a real woman who will really chase you through a real town. It has verses for the dwarf, and the boots, and the blue cat, and the boar. It has a chorus about getting out of her hall, that entire rooms of strangers apparently roar together, banging their mugs on the downbeat, and every round of it ends the same way, with the whole crowd shouting the line the sailors made famous, "Run, lads, run." The keepers had enough. The adventurers sang it for me. Right here, all 5, standing in the shallows, mugs of my good tea raised, banging on absolutely nothing on the downbeat, frightening every sensible creature within a mile of the meadow. And no, before anyone down at this end of the bank asks, and I can see one of you drawing breath to ask, I will not be singing it. I know how it goes. Every word, if you must know. It does rather stay with a person. But some things want a crew of 40 and a rolling deck, not one keeper and a quiet river, and I know my limits, and I have never once regretted knowing them. Hum it, though. On the walk between shelves, some evening, when I think nobody's about. That much I'll neither confirm nor deny. And that's the story, exactly as it was given to me, on this bank, with the corrections argued over, and the bore's speed exaggerated a little more with each retelling, I suspect, the way the best true stories are. As far as anyone knows, Tessa keeps the Gilded Gull still. The floors get scrubbed at dawn. The broom stands in its corner. And somewhere, out on the wide water tonight, you may be sure, some crew or other is singing about her. And every sailor in Brindlemoor Harbour knows to mind their manners at the tavern by the steps, because the food is good and the ale is better. But the keeper is legendary. I do love that one. I truly do. I'll tell you a small secret about it too. It doesn't leave. Some evenings, weeks apart, I'll be shelving books at the far end of the library, minding my own business, and the knight in his stockings will simply arrive in my head, uninvited, or the baker dancing away up on that table, and I'll laugh out loud right there in the quiet, all by myself. Which earns me some looks, I don't mind telling you. There's nothing quite like turning around mid-chuckle to find a perfectly serene traveller peering at you over their reading glasses, wondering what on earth has gotten into the keeper. I've stopped trying to explain it. Some stories are just like that. They move in, and they keep you company. And every so often they tap you on the shoulder just to make you laugh again. But before we go on, you there, my newest arrival. You made it just in time, and I'm so glad you did. Stay as long as you like tonight. There are more stories coming, and the tea's still warm, and the fireflies show no sign of leaving, and neither does anybody else from the look of it, because I'm quite sure I'm not the only one here holding on to something worth telling. So, the bank is open. Would anyone like to share a story of their own? Or would you like to hear another one of mine?